Guys, I've been making videos for a very long time at this point, and I think it's about time that I finally confess something that I've been holding in. I'm a degenerate Pokemon fan. Since I was a kid, I was making videos with my Chinese knockoff action figures. I built a shrine in my bedroom dedicated to this franchise. I've spent thousands of hours playing Pokemon Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Nuzlocke on Twitch. And each year, I somehow convince myself that these games are gonna end up good again, just to get disappointed and restart the cycle of optimism over and over and over. Yeah, although I do love anything and everything that has to do with this franchise, which is honestly just a glorified animal cruelty simulator, the recent game releases have not been that great. Legends Arceus was a nice twist on things and gave me hope that the future might be a little bright, but then we got Scarlet and Violet, and my entire hopes and dreams got flushed down the toilet. Of course, Legends is coming out eventually, but I've told myself that I am no longer getting excited about these games. Which is a total lie, by the way. I'm buying this game on the day of release. Now, as for when the shift in quality happened, it's pretty easy to pinpoint that the jump to 3D is the main culprit. However, the actual decline in quality is way more complicated in my opinion, and not just because of the jump to 3D, but also because of the fact that Gen 5 was so looked down upon by fans at the time. But that's another topic that I can angrily yap about in a future video. All I have to say is that if you were a part of the crowd of people dissing on Gen 5 when it came out, I hope you die. I've actually talked about the 3DS Pokemon games in a video that I made about 18 months ago, but in reality I only spoke about Gen 6, and then on top of that I mainly focused on just the games themselves, which makes sense since it was a video essay about the games. But today I want to do something a tiny bit different. Rather than just revisiting the 3DS Pokemon games at face value, I want to talk about everything that had to do with the 3DS era, since it made up a major part of my childhood from the ages of 10 to 14, and I recently realized that although I'm not the biggest fan of these games, this era still had a ton of cool moments that I would love to yap about. January 8th, 2013 is when we got our very first Nintendo Direct of that year, but things were a bit different and quirky, since it wasn't just a regular Nintendo Direct. No. Instead, it was a Direct solely dedicated to Pokemon. When I first saw this Pokemon Direct on the home menu of YouTube while sitting on the toilet after school and scrolling on my green 5th generation iPod Touch, I damn near pulled an Elvis and had a heart attack right there and then while going number 2. You have to understand that back in early 2013, I was not as active when it came to following when Nintendo Directs were happening, since I had not been brainwashed yet. aka I wasn't on Twitter. I didn't truly start following Nintendo Directs until about the midpoint of 2013, and since I didn't know exactly when these Directs were gonna be happening early on, they always came as a surprise to me when I would go on YouTube and find their recordings, and with this Direct in particular, I was over the moon when discovering it, since for the most part, Pokemon was the only thing I cared about. When it came to the presentation itself, it was only 11 minutes long, and 90% of it was just Iwata giving us a history lesson on the mainline Pokemon games, and how each one had evolved with the new Nintendo handheld it released on. For example, Iwata talked about how the Game Boy Advance link cable made things like double battles easier, and then also how the Nintendo DS's Wi-Fi connection allowed players to trade with people all around the world. This history lesson would then lead to the climax of the Direct, where Iwata would say, "We have made it to the big year of 2013, and I have one more brand new, very epic, revolutionary breakthrough for you." Bam! 3D Pikachu! The rumors that every PokeTuber was talking about throughout 2012 finally came true. Using the more powerful technology of the 3DS and feeding into the whole gimmick of the console, which is 3D, Pokemon made its jump to a new dimension. Everyone and their grandparents wanted Pokemon to make this jump to 3D for quite a while, so finally getting the confirmation that it would happen on the first game releasing on this new console was super exciting. Now, I must say, I am not entirely sure what the general public's perception of this announcement trailer was when it happened, since, well, I was 9 years old, but strictly speaking, from my perspective and initial reaction, I could not contain my excitement. Granted, I was blinded by the optimistic joy and happiness of being a 9-year-old child who was obsessed with anything that had to do with Pokemon, but in my eyes, this game looked amazing. I was immediately on board the Pokemon X and Y bandwagon after this January Direct, and I can say without a doubt in my mind that the months leading up to October 2013 were filled with the most joy and excitement I had ever felt for a video game. Like, for example, since that point, I have not been happy. The rising levels of excitement that I felt for this game weren't just because it was gonna be in 3D for the first time, but also because I was knee-deep in following all of the rumors and leaks that we were getting during the months leading up to this game's release date. Nowadays, Pokemon leaks and rumors are honestly not that great, and fall into two categories that I created. Either they are so obviously fake to the point that no one even bats an eye at them, or quite literally every little detail about every game ever gets revealed by one of those accounts no one likes, leading to everyone losing any real excitement about the game since, well, everything got revealed in a Twitter thread. Now, although Pokemon leaks are not as fun and original in big 2024, other than that big data leak that was kinda cool, these leaks weren't always that bad. For a matter of fact, back in my day, there was a hidden art behind making leaked Pokemon content. These rumors on different forums weren't just cheap Twitter bait, but instead were peak content that you would see random PokeTubers tweak over. For example, the most iconic leaks and rumors we saw leading up to the release of X and Y are by far the different fake Pokemon that kept getting revealed. I remember I would go on YouTube all the time just to watch my favorite content creators look at Cerebi.net forums for 30 minutes straight and analyze a rumor that was more likely than not made by some random kid in their parents' basement. But at the time, it was so convincing. One of the first major batches of rumors we saw was this one, where a leaker claimed that over 100 new Pokemon were gonna be in X and Y, and then on top of that, they listed some examples of the Pokemon we would see, such as a grass-type bear whose body is made of berries, and a fighting-type Pokemon that resembled a giant living sneaker. How did I believe this stuff growing up? Obviously, we now know that this entire forum was completely false, since for one, X and Y did not have over 100 new Pokemon, and second, this berry bear and sneaker don't exist. Rumors like these were popping up on Cerebi, Reddit, and whatever other forum you could think of all the time, and for baby LaiyenZ, that just meant I could not escape this franchise from January all the way up until October 2013, and to be honest, I didn't really wanna escape. Another one of the most iconic moments leading up to the release of this game has to be the leaks created by Mr. XY. Mr. XY was a prominent quote-unquote leaker during the Gen 6 era, and many of their 4chan posts during the first couple of months in 2013 would go viral and get a ton of YouTube coverage. Whenever I was going on YouTube from January up until June 2013, the only leaker I would hear mentioned was Mr. XY himself, since this guy was able to get a chokehold on every Pokemon content creator due to his convincing leaks. But now that I look back on it, this stuff was not convincing one bit. For example, in March of 2013, a whole 8 months before X and Y was released, Mr. XY posted what he claimed to be the entire Pokédex of the game. Now, let me re-establish what I just said in case you can't tell how crazy that is. He posted this complete leaked Pokédex 8 months before the game released. He claimed that his coworker was able to get this for him, and when reading over the original reactions to this Pokédex leak on Reddit, it is hilarious to see how many people were convinced it was real. People were saying, "This is perfectly legit," and "Oh my god, Mr. XY, please have my babies." But when you look deeper at the Pokédex itself, why are there so many psychic types? I feel like this leak would have been way more believable if Mr. XY spent even a tiny bit more time making more original typings, because this list is about 90% psychic types. For example, my favorite one is number 738, Egom. Because it kind of sounds like Egon. My friend Egon. Hi Egon. Hey Egon, if you're watching this video. Hi Egon. These outrageous and completely mind-boggling leaks don't just end with Mr. XY, however, since the final months leading up to this game saw an influx in fake magazine and Koro scans. Koro scans are probably the most iconic form of Pokemon leak, and during the XY era, I feel like we saw some of the best and most convincing scans in this franchise's history, since we got stuff like this. If you showed me this nowadays, I would honestly believe these are real Pokemon. What's even funnier is the fact that so many fake Koro scans were popping up during the final months before X and Y's release, to the point that when real things started getting leaked, people did not believe it. We started getting scans of the starter's middle evolutions and the mega evolutions in this game, but people just brushed it off since they thought there was no way this was a real Pokemon. But it was. Yeah, all the fake leaks, rumors, and forums led to what I view as the pinnacle of the Pokemon hype cycle, when all these magazine scans started flooding the internet and people realized that they were very real. I remember when I first saw the leaks of the middle evolutions, I fell in love with Frogadier, and so did every other person on the planet. Seeing this frog ninja Pokemon thing made me so unbelievably excited to purchase this game with my mom's money, and all that hype that was just continuously building up led to one day, October 12th, 2013. After spending months following all the rumors and leaks about this game, it finally came time to purchase it, and I had pre-ordered my copy of both X and Y at my local Target, and spent the entire school day on the day of release thinking about this game. I was telling all my friends how I was gonna go buy it right when school is over and play it all day, and I was low-key flexing on them because I was getting both copies, even though that was kind of a dumb financial decision, and also my mom was paying for it. So thank you, Mom. Once the school day was finally over, I hopped in the car and drove straight to Target with my mom. And once we got to the store itself, I remember just feeling an overwhelming amount of joy. Looking back on this day, it was honestly one of the most magical moments in my life, since it was pure happiness. I was wearing my Pokemon t-shirt, I walked through the card aisle to see what new sets were available, and when I made it to the back of the store, I saw the stack of games behind the counter in the tech aisle. So after using my mom's credit card to buy the game, thank you Mom again, I scurried back home, got comfy on my living room couch, and spent the next 4 days straight playing this game. When I would wake up, I was playing the game. When I would go to the bathroom, I was playing the game. When I was in the car, I was playing the game. And when it was time for bed, I was still playing the game. I sunk so many hours into Pokemon X and Y that first week, and I must say my initial impressions of the game were way more positive than they are today. Obviously, having gone back and played the game a couple of times after that first playthrough, I do have my fair share of complaints with this title, and I think X and Y is down there with one of the worst Pokemon games, but not completely the worst since all the Switch mainline games exist. Even though I don't think this game is that great, it's hard for me to ignore how much fun I had with it when I first bought it as a 10-year-old kid. At the time, lots of the major issues that people had with the game were not even coming to mind for me, since all I could think about was how cool Mega Evolutions are and that I got a free Charizard. I do now realize that this Charizard that they gave me for free was just propaganda from Game Freak in a way to convince Gen 1 fans to buy the game, but I didn't really care about that when I first got the game as a 10-year-old, since I thought Mega Evolutions, and especially Mega Charizard, were the coolest concepts in Pokemon history. And honestly, I still think Mega Evolutions are the coolest concept in Pokemon history. Outside of Mega Evolutions, my two favorite aspects of this game that I loved as both a kid and as an adult are the towns and the music. Now, Pokemon games have always had good music, and for the most part, memorable towns, and I think that X and Y did an excellent job of continuing this trend. Obviously, this may be a bit of nostalgia, but the music in this game really stood out to me and encompasses that French theme that the game is going for. For example, the Vanilleville town soundtrack is up there as one of my favorite Pokemon town soundtracks ever. As for the towns themselves, some people say that they were bland and boring, and don't get me wrong, I can see where you're coming from, but in my opinion, I actually found myself really enjoying the setting of Kalos. Especially since this was the first 3D Pokemon game, I think Game Freak did a good job at making a pretty immersive experience, and they also drove home those French ideas really well. There are some areas of the game that do come across as pretty empty or underwhelming, but I'll give this game the benefit of the doubt simply because it's the first 3D Pokemon game. The other games, however, don't get an excuse. Okay, I've kind of been glazing this game for too long, and I sound like one of those people on Twitter who say, well, actually, this game was not that bad looking back on it. Don't worry, I'm not like that, because I still think this game sucks. No matter how cool Mega Evolutions were, or how good the music was, and how much I loved the concept of Kalos, it doesn't get rid of the fact that this was by far the most hand-holding lazy attempt of a game we had ever seen up until that point. Of course, Pokemon games have never been hard games, but from Gen 1 to 5, you at least had a tiny bit of individual exploration and problem solving you could do, but with X and Y, they threw that completely out the window. This game had zero level of difficulty, and unfortunately was the catalyst that made Game Freak move in a direction where all their new games were just hand-holding slop. Well, other than Ultra Sun and Moon, which I'll get into later. It's kinda sad to look back on the gameplay and how poorly Game Freak did with it, since I'll always give X and Y that nostalgia benefit of the doubt, because it's a generation I loved as a kid. But when looking at it strictly from a video game perspective, it's impossible not to highlight the variety of problems it had. Now let's look past the video games for a tiny bit, since there were some redeemable qualities that came out of the X and Y era, such as the anime, which many consider to be the best during this generation, other than the end, and then also, I loved the TCG during this era, which is somewhat of an unpopular opinion. I won't sit here and say that every set during the X and Y era was amazing, since they weren't, but I thought sets like Evolutions and Generations were amazing, especially Evolutions, because it gave someone like me a chance to obtain some of those original cards without having to spend a gazillion dollars on a base set booster box. Overall, X and Y is one of the weirdest generations to look back on as a Pokemon fan, since I love the overall vibe that this generation came with, but ultimately I was let down by the fact that the games never reached their full potential, especially since Pokemon Z ended up getting scrapped. So honestly, I'll always look at Kalos and these games as an unfinished what-if story. Now, XY did not mark the end of the 6th generation as a whole, since on May 7th, 2014, the Pokemon Company secretly went onto their website and announced that the next big game in the series would be released worldwide in November of that same year. This game being Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. In all honesty, this game's announcement did not come as much of a surprise to anyone, since each of the previous Nintendo handheld consoles had a remake of an earlier Pokemon generation, with Fire Red and Leaf Green on the Game Boy Advance, and then Heart Gold Soul Silver on the DS. However, the lack of any shock value did not mean that these games were not welcomed in with open arms. For example, YouTube user Amdersum had this to say about the game's initial announcement. Yeah. What made these games extra exciting for me in comparison to the previous remakes was the fact that they introduced completely new concepts that were original to the 6th generation, such as Mega Evolutions, the Fairy typing, and of course the most exciting concept at the time, 3D graphics. This is gonna be a recurring talking point in today's video, but for basically every Pokemon game announcement ever, I get unnecessarily excited, and that was especially the case with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, since I am a sucker for Pokemon remakes. Fire Red and Leaf Green were the first Game Boy Pokemon games I had ever played, and for the longest time, Heart Gold Soul Silver was hands down my favorite game ever. Until Black 2 White 2, of course. Since I was such a big fan of remakes, this game's announcement immediately tickled that little part of my brain that urges me to spend my mom's money. So right when pre-orders became available, I locked myself into getting both copies of the game from GameStop. I will admit that the hype cycle leading up to this game's release was not as exciting for me, at least in comparison to the XY one, since most of the leaks were pretty mediocre. I think the main reason for this was because the game was a remake, so we already had a general idea of what the Pokédex was gonna look like, what the story was gonna be, and what the overall aesthetic of the game was. However, the information we didn't know was what the Mega Evolutions in this game were gonna be. And you best believe all the leakers and fake gremlin attention goblins got ready to spread the most heinous fake Pokemon Koro scan leaks known to man. There are so many fake Mega Evolution leaks that I could talk about in this video, but my favorite has to be this one, since at first glance, it is shockingly believable. At least it was to me as an 11-year-old kid. The way the photo was taken, the overall design of the magazine, and the fact that Sableye and Diancie were real Mega Evolutions that had already been revealed got me convinced that I was looking at a legit Koro scan. But as we all know, this would not be the case, since Darkrai, Chandelure, and Scolipede did not end up getting Mega Evolutions. Also, these Mega Evolution designs kinda suck. Even with the influx of fake propaganda being spread by leakers seeking attention, there were still some legit Koro leaks that were popping up during the months leading up to this game's release. The most iconic and memorable leak has to be this one, where we basically got all the information on this game in one single magazine dump. We learned what our characters were gonna look like, the designs for Team Magma and Aqua, Steven! And of course, we got the highly anticipated starter Mega Evolutions. As a day one certified Sceptile enthusiast, I was so happy with the design that we got, and I know this is a bit of a controversial take and that the Mudkip community might revolt against me, but I think Mega Swampert looks stupid. Another one of the more iconic Koro scan leaks that we got during the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire era was this one of Mega Lopunny, and the reason I say it's one of the more iconic leaks is because no one believed it was real until the official announcement came out. There were actually plenty of head-scratching Mega Evolutions that got leaked and later announced as real, and many of them weren't head-scratching from a bad perspective, but more from a perspective of why didn't Game Freak put these Pokemon in X and Y? Mega Evolutions like Mega Metagross made sense for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, since it's iconic to the 3rd generation, but why was Mega Pidgeot not in X and Y? You literally catch a Pidgey on Route 1 of the game. Even with all of the questionable decisions that Game Freak made when it came to Mega Evolutions during the 6th generation, both I and the horde of Pokemon fans were so excited to purchase this game, and right when the calendar hit November 21st, we were lined up to give our money to a company that does not care about us. Similar to the day X and Y came out, I spent most of my time at school just flexing on all of my friends that I was getting both copies of the game, but in reality, most of them didn't even really care about Pokemon at that time in our lives, and instead wanted to talk about cool things, like LeBron 11s. And the social political climate of 2014. Once the school day was over, I zoomed over to GameStop, picked up my game, and also got this super epic double-sided pre-order bonus poster, which I don't own anymore. I don't know where it went. But at least I have this Sword and Shield one, right? After picking up the game from GameStop and making my way back to my house, I went to my favorite spot in my living room, booted my black 3DS XL up, and was ready to immerse myself into the world of 3D Hoenn. In the house that I grew up in, there used to be this little nook couch thing in the corner of my living room. I don't know what the actual name of this piece of furniture is. I'll put a picture on screen so you have an idea of what I'm talking about, but this is where I spent most of my time when I wasn't at my desk. I would cuddle up all nice and cozy and spend hours just immersing myself in whatever game I was into at the time, and in November of 2014, ORAS was one of those games on the list. When it came to my first impressions of the game when I was 11 years old, I immediately liked this title over X and Y, and I still hold that opinion today. Although I still think that Heart Gold and Soul Silver are the best remakes of all time in the Pokemon franchise, partly because of nostalgia, I'm willing to put Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire up there as a close second, since these games are genuinely enjoyable. I don't think I'm even saying this from a blinded childhood perspective, since I've gone back and played these games a couple of times since my first playthrough, and each time I find myself getting immersed in this region and story. However, I will say that this game is still far from perfect, but that also applies to basically every 3D Pokemon game. Many of the prominent gameplay issues that we saw in X and Y carried over to ORAS, such as the game being too easy, there being excessive hand-holding, and the most annoying thing being the removal of the Battle Frontier. No Battle Frontier in this game, just highlighted how lazy Game Freak is as a company, since it was such a layup move for fan approval, and also was just a good addition from a replayability standpoint, but instead, they just included this damn sign in the game saying that the Battle Frontier project has started. But it never came. I also am not the biggest fan of the Delta episode. I think the concept behind it was good, but the actual product that we received was pretty underwhelming. Don't get me wrong, I am always on board for any kind of post-game content, since I love when developers give us as players a tiny bit more to do in their game once the main story is done. But with the Delta episode, most of it was just cutscenes, and the story felt so rushed and all over the place. Overall, I do think that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are good games, but like most Pokemon games we see today, it missed on all the little tiny things that could have pushed it in a way better direction. Now, outside of the main plot and story of Gen 6 and other mumbo-jumbo that these games had going on, both X and Y and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are surprisingly the Pokemon games I used online multiplayer in the most. Ignoring all the bad aspects that these games may come with, they without a doubt had the best multiplayer experience in my eyes, and that bottom screen UI on both these games were a mwah, chef's kiss. The player search system, or PISS, was one of the best additions to any Pokemon game ever, and I remember spending hours just going through all the possible game modes that I had at my disposal. Even outside of doing things like online battles, I would spend hours simply doing wonder trades to see what crazy Pokemon I could get from around the world. Literally, on my copy of Pokemon Y, I have accumulated so many random shiny Pokemon from Japan from simply just spamming wonder trades all day. I'm also somewhat positive that my love for wonder trading is the reason why I have a deep down desire to constantly gamble away all my life savings. But hey! I got this cool Cobalion from the Dominican Republic. Nowadays, wonder trades go by the name surprise trades, which is not as cool of a name, but I'm glad this feature that got implemented on the 3DS games has carried over to basically every Switch title, and I hope as we get more games in the series on future consoles, they decide to keep including this feature, since I don't know what I would do without wonder trading. As for the anime and TCG series during ORAS, they were not as prominent as they were for X and Y, and this is primarily because the X and Y anime was still going on and was the big talk of the town when it came to Pokemon. There were some cool animated trailers and shorts that coincided with these games, but nothing substantial like a full-on anime series. As for the TCG, there were 3 expansions, and the reason I say 3 in a very non-confident way is because I only view one of them as a true expansion dedicated to this game. The other 2 consisted of a smaller special edition expansion set that only included 30 cards, and then the other was more inspired by Emerald, but still contained a ton of X and Y content. Even though the ORAS generation of TCG was not as crazy as X and Y, I still have a ton of memories of the Primal Clash expansion, mainly because I really wanted that full art Groudon EX that almost looked like a gold card, but I never ended up pulling it, which is really depressing. To summarize the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire era of Pokemon 3DS games, it was definitely shorter and not as overly hyped up as the other games on the console, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that it was a pretty good game. It introduced a ton of cool new Mega Evolutions, it perfectly represented Hoenn in 3D, and most importantly, the game was fun. So, after Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Generation 6 slowly came to an end, with the anime concluding, the TCG reaching its maximum amount of expansions, and then also the 3DS gained a little bit of a power-up. So, because of all of this, it was now time for Game Freak to move on to Generation 7, and this is when things get kind of crazy, in both a good and bad way, but primarily bad, in my opinion. But okay, please don't get mad at me, by the way, this video is just all my opinion. I should have mentioned this way earlier. This is an opinion-based video, and it's okay to have healthy dialogue about opinions. Please don't get mad at me if you like these games, okay? Please! On February 27th, 2016, 20 years after Pokemon Red and Green were released worldwide, we got the announcement of our brand new mainline series games, Pokemon Sun and Moon. This is one of the more iconic Pokemon announcement trailers of all time for a number of reasons. It was the 20th anniversary, there were already plenty of speculations and hype going on about a new generation being released, and then also, this live-action trailer was just kind of fire. The trailer did follow a very similar structure to that X and Y Pokemon Direct that happened in 2013, which was just a massive history lesson on the Pokemon franchise from its beginning, but then at the end of the trailer, boom! A new game, a new name, Pokemon Sun and Moon, available in 9 languages. Now, this 20th anniversary trailer was strictly to announce that, hey, a game exists, and this is what it's called. We wouldn't see actual gameplay or real content about Pokemon Sun and Moon until a couple of months later on May 10th, 2016, when we got a trailer showcasing the starters. But before we get to this trailer, it's very important that I talk about these guys. because look at them, they're beautiful. I know I said literally in this very video that the X and Y leaks and rumors were top tier peak Pokemon hype material, but I lied because the leaks we saw during Sun and Moon were so hilariously amazing. I am more than positive that if you've been around the Pokemon community since the 3DS era, you have seen these fake Pokemon, since they had a chokehold grip on every fan of this franchise from March up until the official starter announcement in May. I was especially bought into the fact that these guys were entirely real and were gonna be the official starter Pokemon in this game, since I fell in love with this guy right here, the little water alligator crocodile lizard thing. But it was always a forbidden love with the little water alligator crocodile lizard thing, since in reality, he was never going to exist, since there was already a little water alligator crocodile lizard thing that was released 20 years ago. Obviously, none of these starters ended up becoming real, and we learned that thanks to this trailer where Litten, Rowlet, and Popplio were revealed. I think I have a live reaction video of when I first watched this announcement trailer back in 2016, but it's deep in one of my old hard drives that I used to store my YouTube videos from back in the day, and I am way too lazy to go looking for it. But here is an old thumbnail where I was looking frickin' epic. Of the three starters, I immediately joined Team Litten, since I've always been a fan of cats. I have cats, I like cats in media. Cats are cool, and to have a cat starter Pokemon was super exciting since it was on 4 feet, and there was no way that it would end up on 2 feet as a final evolution since it's a cat. I also did like Rowlet because it was round, and that's basically the only reason why I liked him. I didn't like Popplio. I'll say it right now, I didn't like Popplio. I still don't like Popplio. Nope. Don't like him. Some bad vibes off this sealed dog thing. So, now that the official starter Pokemon were revealed for Sun and Moon, a whole new wave of leaked content began flooding the internet, with hundreds of thousands of different official final evolutions for these guys being quote-unquote revealed. I honestly can't remember the last starter trio to have this many different final evolution leaks, and the most iconic one is definitely this one. This leak took over the Pokemon YouTube community like a plague, and for some reason, everyone was so on board with it being real. There was Rowlet, who turned into an Assassin's Creed character. There was Litten, who became a super cool cat, which I wish was real. And then Popplio. Oh my god! I'll be honest, I did kind of want this leak to be real, since I love the Litten concept, but obviously it got debunked. But then, this image surfaced on the internet. There's no way this image can be real, right? There's no way Litten is gonna go from a cool little kitty cat, little kitty cat, to a giant tiger wrestling guy, right? We're not gonna get another firefighting type starter, huh? It's not gonna happen! So this image ended up becoming entirely real. Most of us who saw this leak in real time were convinced that this was not gonna be official and it was just some troll made this, since there was just no way Game Freak was gonna make another two-legged standing up firefighting type Pokemon based on a cat. But it was real. And although I was not a fan of Incineroar at the time, I have to say that I have been Incineroar-pilled. Or even some would say, red-pilled. But not like that. Not like red-pilled like that. Red-pilled because Incineroar's red. Even though I am a die-hard fire-type starter chooser, this Decidueye is the best-looking final evolution from this generation in my opinion, since it gives off real Greninja vibes, which is basically nonchalant, cool, guy. Funny enough, while all of these leaks and official announcement trailers were getting released, I ended up becoming a full-blown Pokemon YouTuber. For whatever reason. At the time, becoming a PokeTuber was a major transition for me, since my prior YouTube content was all Call of Duty trick-shotting, but the hype leading up to the release of Sun and Moon was just filling my body up with something that made me want to sit in front of a camera and react to random Pokemon trailers. I was locked in. I had full-blown locked-in syndrome, since every time I got a notification from the official Pokemon Pokemon Company YouTube channel, I would scurry over to my computer and watch whatever new regional Pokemon was gonna get announced, such as this guy. I don't know how a Pokemon got elected as president. When the Pokemon Company was releasing these occasional 1 to 2 minute long announcement trailers, it was such a fun time to be a Pokemon fan, since we were getting new content like every other week, and then also these trailers were always straight to the point. They never wasted our time, they just said, hey, Executor has a long neck now. One of my favorite memories that always sticks around with me when thinking about the Sun and Moon era is how I was able to convince around 5 of my friends to buy 3DS consoles and play this game with me. My friend group at the time in middle school were not super into Nintendo and Pokemon, but me being, well, me, was non-stop yapping about this new game that was getting released in November, and I guess I was able to yap enough to a point that got all of them to invest in the Black Friday new 3DS consoles and buy this game so that they could play it with me. Now, as of today, all of those friends have gone back to not really caring about Pokemon, which is kind of sad. Because, well, look at me. So, once I completed my part in Nintendo's grand marketing schemes, Sun and Moon finally released on November 18th of 2016, and like with every game in the series, I was in line purchasing it on the day of release. My story of Sun and Moon goes exactly like my X and Y and ORAS story, which is I bought the game after school, went back home, and grinded through it for 4 days straight. As for my initial impressions of the game, I had a lot of thoughts, since this was not a traditional Pokemon game whatsoever. For years up until this game's release, we were familiar with the traditional gym model, where we battled through 8 gyms, go to the Elite Four, and then at the end, you fought the champion. But Sun and Moon completely changed this formula by removing gyms and introducing the Island Challenge. If you somehow aren't familiar, the Alola region is made up of 4 islands, and the idea behind the Island Challenge is you visit each of these islands and participate in different trials. Personally, I was not the biggest fan of the Island Challenge. Maybe it was because I was so used to the gym model that having something new was kind of weird, but overall, I just thought that the Island Challenge was kinda boring. On top of this, Sun and Moon as a game is basically just one giant cutscene, so combining this on top of the Island Challenge that I did not like, this game ended up feeling insanely slow during my playthrough. I also hated Z moves, since it was quite literally the stupidest gimmick in any Pokemon game ever, and what made things even worse was the fact that Game Freak literally had the perfect gimmick in the prior generation that they could have just carried over. But no, they want to be funny and unique with each new generation. Even though there were many areas of this game that I did not like during my playthrough, there were still some redeemable qualities that kept me hooked. For example, I loved the concept of the Alolan region Pokemon and how their environment caused them to look different than their counterparts in other games. Also, many of the completely new Pokemon were really well designed. Just look at these monkeys! There were also the Ultra Beasts, which were some extra dimensional Pokemon from Ultra Space. I thought these guys were extremely wacky, and for some reason I had a really hard time catching Guzzlord when I was younger, so I had one of my friends catch him for me during lunch in middle school. Now, outside of my complaints and the things that I did like, it is impossible to talk about this game without discussing its story. I'm not going to go into extreme detail about this game's plot, but all I can say is that Baby LaiyenZ was left in complete shock. You know how in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet they tried doing that end of game game twist in an attempt to try and catch the fanbase off guard. Well, imagine that, but way better in Sun and Moon. Even though I don't like these games that much, the story is one of the best I had encountered in the Pokemon franchise when I was 13 years old. Nothing close to Gen 5 though. I really enjoyed the way the story built up to its final moments, and the characters were all pretty memorable, but once again, the use of cutscenes in this game made me slowly begin to hate every single one of them. Funny enough, Pokemon Sun and Moon are the only Pokemon games I have never replayed, meaning after my first playthrough back in 2016, I have not touched this game, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is I did not enjoy the progression of the game. I've repeatedly said this, but I felt like it was very slow and boring, and it also fell into that trap that most of the 3DS Pokemon games fell into, which was being too easy. Now, the second reason why I did not find myself picking this game back up was because only 4.5 months after its release, the Nintendo Switch came out. This is a very reoccurring thing in each of my videos, I'm now realizing. This console became my primary focal point from late 2016 all the way up until right now. Shout out Mario and Luigi and Dragon Quest. Since I was falling deeper and deeper into the Nintendo Switch pre-release hype cycle, and then eventually once the console came out, I was strictly playing on it 24/7, I found myself retiring my 3DS. Although my time with the 3DS did come to a temporary halt in 2016/2017, the Pokemon Company was not finished on this console, since in June of 2017, just a couple of months after the Switch's release, we got the announcement of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Of all the games I've talked about today, this is the one that excited me the least, and I spent zero time following any of its rumors and leaks. It's not necessarily because this game was not good, since I actually think this game is way better than the original Sun and Moon. It's just because it released at a time when my attention was in other places. Now, even though my attention was dead set on the Nintendo Switch, I was still lined up to purchase Ultra Sun and Moon on the day of its release in November of 2017. And let me tell you something, I spent every hour playing this game that weekend. This game did a great job at improving many of the complaints I had with the original game. The cutscenes, although very prominent still, were not as bad as the original, and for the first time on the 3DS, we got a game that was pretty damn hard. That Ultra Necrozma battle still haunts me to this day. I had to restart it 100 times, and it wasn't the only difficult battle in the game, because Lusamine was pretty hard. Pause. I also feel like the story in Ultra Sun and Moon is superior to the original game, and the best way I've seen someone describe this game was from a Reddit user who once said that the Ultra games are more like how Platinum is to Diamond, rather than a full-on sequel like Black to White 2 is. Overall, the 7th generation of Pokemon was pretty cool. I love the concept of the Alola region, and I hope in the future we get another game that takes place there, since the concept of an island archipelago Pokemon region based on Hawaii is too good to just throw away after one generation. I also forgot to mention the anime and TCG, which were both very weird during this era, because both of them decided to try something unique this time around. In the anime, we got a totally new art style, which many people surprisingly did not like, but I personally loved it. I thought it gave the characters way more expression, and the colors were super vibrant. Now, I did not actually watch this show in its entirety because, well, I got bored at the beginning, but I still think it looked pretty good. As for the TCG, they decided to ditch the EX branding, and this time around introduce GX branding. I don't exactly know why. Even with this questionable change, I can confidently say that the cards during the Sun and Moon era were significantly better than the X and Y era. Just look at the secret rare full arts in the first expansion from this generation. Are you kidding me? Look at that Espeon. Look at the Lapras. They also introduced rainbow rare cards during this generation, the most iconic of which being the rainbow rare Charizard from Burning Shadows. If you're a Max Mofo Pokemon enthusiast, you would remember that this is the card that he spent like 30 years trying to get. Personally, I only ever owned one rainbow rare card, and it was this one that my friend Rudy gave me in high school, a rainbow rare Drumpa. Alright, well that was the 3DS era of Pokemon content, and I can already sense a bunch of people typing in the comments, LaiyenZ, you kind of forgot to talk about Pokemon Rumble World, which was released on the 3DS in April of 2015, so technically the title of this video is clickbait since you didn't actually revisit all the 3DS Pokemon games. I'm severely disappointed in you as a content creator, LaiyenZ, and honestly, you're a horrible person. You should die. You've let me down, LaiyenZ, and I think you deserve everything bad to happen in your life. But please leave me alone. Yes, I know that the 3DS did have additional Pokemon games other than the ones that I talked about today, such as the Game Boy ones, which were released on the Virtual Console, and then of course the variety of spin-offs. Do not worry, I do plan on talking about these spin-off games as a whole in a future dedicated video. I just didn't feel like it was necessary to talk about them in this video since I wanted to pay more attention to the mainline series of games and content. Also, does anyone actually care that deeply about whether or not I talk about Pokemon Battle Trozy? How do I pronounce that game? Okay, thank you all so much for making it to this point of the video. If you enjoyed, drop a like and subscribe so the number can become very big and I can become very happy and also a better person, since as we all know, the bigger the number, the better the person. Comment down below what video you want to see next. I personally have a ton of ideas since I can literally yap about anything, and I do want to eventually talk about the other Pokemon games, so let me know if that's something you would be interested in seeing. Also, check out these videos that I made in the past. I think you will very much enjoy them, especially this video since it didn't do well. Please watch it. I really love this video. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with this video, but it didn't do well. Please watch it. And finally, once again, make sure to subscribe, because bigger number. Okay, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all eventually.